Hello.
Hello and welcome back to
Sugar?
and Spice. We are back with two more very interesting tales, folk tales in
Yes.
fact. And without much ado, let's get started. Over to Deepthi, who's going to start with the first story for today.
So, my story for the day is about the great legendary poet Kalidasa. Kalidasa was born to Brahmin parents and he was a child prodigy. He was very intelligent when he was a small child. When he grew up to be a young man, he was all the more intelligent and he was also a bit proud about his intelligence. One day he went to a temple, a nearby temple, when he saw a yogi was sitting there and he was preaching. He was speaking to a crowd. He found that the yogi had uttered something which was a grammatical error. He was talking in Sanskrit and there was a grammatical error in what he had said. He immediately corrected him. He said, "No, what you're saying is wrong," and made fun of him. Yogi was very angry and upset, and he said, "Oh, you think you're a great person? You think you know better than me? I'm going to curse you." And he cursed him. "May all your knowledge, whatever you know until now, everything be erased from your head, everything, whatever you know, and you become a totally stupid and a foolish person." And hearing this, Kalidasa was taken aback. He immediately realized what he did was wrong. He fell at his feet and asked for his forgiveness. The yogi had calmed down by now and he said, "Okay, what we can do now is go pray to Goddess Bhadrakali. Once you get Goddess Bhadrakali's blessings, you will get all your knowledge back and you will become a greater scholar than you are already." Kalidasa had no other go. He had to agree to what the yogi said. And from that moment, he completely transformed into this foolish person, acting physically also, and whatever he knew he had forgotten. But at the back of his mind, he had this memory running, that this had happened. And he started wandering in the forest, living a nomad's life. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Ujjaini, there was a rich landlord who had a beautiful daughter. This girl had a very unique way of, she was a very intelligent girl and she was very particular about the person she is going to marry. The landlord wanted, of course, to get his daughter married as soon as possible. But she was very sure of what kind of person she wanted. She wanted somebody who would defeat her in a verbal combat. She was a master of Sanskrit and all the scriptures, and she wanted somebody who would be able to defeat her. So the landlord tried so many people, everybody, since she was beautiful, there were so many young men who were ready to marry her, but nobody was able to defeat her, in terms of intelligence. Days went by. The landlord got very impatient. He called his, council members and all the scholars of the kingdom, and he said, "Please find someone. Please forget the debate, forget everything. Just find somebody. I want her to get married." So all these group of council members, they decided, let's teach her a lesson. Let's find a totally foolish person, and get her married. Somehow trick her into marrying him. They went out in search for such a person when they found Kalidasa. Very first time when they looked at him, the way he was behaving, they understood that he's not a normal person. They brought him nicely dressed, and when they were close to reaching just outside the huge mansion of the landlord, they saw on the wall there was a picture of Ravana. Yes, Ravana from Ramayana. There was a picture of Ravana, and immediately Kalidasa said, "Ambada Ravana." Not Ravana, he said Ravana. that itself, the girl was standing right inside and she heard this and she said, this person actually is a stupid person. He's a foolish person. He doesn't even know how to pronounce Ravana. So one of the scholars jumped out and he said, no, that's not the case. What he said is right. Ravana's siblings, Vibhishana and Kumbhakarna, don't you know? Both the names have Bha in it. So it must be Rabhana, right? Not Ravana. Okay, the girl was convinced. That was a convincing reply. So finally, she decides to marry him. But again, the truth could not be hidden for a long time. On the very first night, she realized that this person was not normal, and he was a foolish person, not the person whom she wanted to marry. So she said, please leave the house. I don't want you to be my husband. Kalidasa was very sober, but this actually, it was very insulting for him. He was very, very sad, upset, that he ran inside the forest and got into a Kali temple, which was right in the middle of the forest. He got inside and he looked to pray to goddess Bhadrakali when he realized that the goddess had gone out for her evening rounds. So he stayed inside the temple and he locked the door from inside. When goddess Bhadrakali returned, she saw that the temple doors were closed. She called out, "Who's inside?" Kalidasa replied, "Who's outside?" She was taken aback. She said, "Kali." And Kalidasa replied, "I am her Dasa." Okay, so this happened, and goddess Bhadrakali understood that this person inside needed some help, and she asked, "What is it that you want?" She was pleased at the way he said that I am her Dasa. He said, "Ma, I don't want anything else. I want knowledge. Only your blessings can give me knowledge back." So she understood she was the goddess after all. She knew what had happened. She said, "Put your tongue out through the gap in the door." He put his tongue out and she wrote the verses of knowledge on his tongue, and he became this great scholar, Kalidasa, from that day. That is the story, the legend rather, behind how he got the name Kalidasa. Actually, there are many, Srija, if you know, Kalidasa's origin, so many different stories.
Yes.
None of it is actually, proven, or there is no proper source to the history of Kalidasa. So this is just one of the legends which
But
is
it's
there.
a beautiful one,
Yes.
so beautifully. But there are similarities. There are lots
Yes.
of different versions of the story, but there are similarities. At least the Kali temple and how he's blessed by the goddess.
And they also go ahead to say that he went back to the girl, to the wife, and she was like shocked to see this young man, so handsome. Yeah, and he spoke to her in Sanskrit, and that made her like such a great loss that I've had. But because of the insult, he couldn't accept her legally.
So he didn't go back.
Yeah, he didn't go back to her. And after that, he wrote all the great Megha Sandesham and all the such beautiful works. And this was a very unique story of Kalidasa, I felt.
Very beautiful story, yes.
One.
And yeah, like we said, you would have heard different versions of the story,
True.
but this is one of them, and a very, very interesting one.
Yes, so that's about my story. I hope you all liked it. The next one is a very, very different but very unique story again. Over to you, Srija.
Yeah, so this one is a little folk tale from Punjab, and I thought it just felt right now in this heat, with the simmering heat of summer. This story seemed to somehow fit into the pattern. Yes, so I thought, why not a story from Punjab? A rustic story, nothing to do with divinity like the one Deepthi just told us, but it's a very sweet tale, and it's about two friends. And before I start, see, most folk stories have these, they deal with a lot of simple ideas based on greed or lust, or things which the story is a very simple story, but when you look into it, you realize that it carries a profound meaning. So this one is about two friends, Banta Singh and Ghanta Singh. Okay, two farmers, two very simple men who lived in this little village. They didn't have much by way of possessions. They were quite, of course, they were two men who were happy with what they have, you could say. They didn't have families to speak of, but they were very close friends. And anything they did together. So they worked together, they ate together. So all the time they spent was with each other. They were very fond of each other. And the only thing being, there was a slight difference between the two men. Now, Ghanta Singh was the cunning one of the two. He always looked at what he could get out of something, so he looked for the benefits or advantages that he could have. And contrary to this, Banta Singh was a simpleton, a very sweet-hearted fellow who believed wholeheartedly in his friend, and he never really questioned what he did. He was a nice, very straightforward person, but simple. So what happened is, one day Ghanta Singh came to Banta Singh and said, "Bhai, I have this brilliant idea. Would you agree with what I have to say?" So even before what the idea was, he never spoke of the idea, it was before that. But Banta Singh very sweetly said, "Of course, I agree to whatever it is that you have to say, because when have I ever said no?" That was the faith he had in his friend. So Ghanta Singh said, "Look, we have very few things, but there are three prized possessions that we have. Why don't we share them? 50-50. In fact, the title of the story is 50-50. Okay, coming back to the narration. So Ghanta Singh says, "Why don't we share everything 50-50? Because anyway we do things together. So it doesn't make sense that we do things separately." So Banta Singh was so happy, overjoyed with his idea. He hugged his friend so hard that Ghanta Singh's bones rattled. He said, "Okay, enough. Banta Singh tells him, no, I love your idea, let's do it. So how do we go about this?" So Ghanta Singh thought a little and said, "Look, we have three prized possessions, as I told you. One is my cow, then you have this very warm blanket, and then you have this bear tree, a wood apple tree behind your house. So these are the three possessions that we really love. So why don't we share them 50-50? So Banta Singh, of course, says, "Of course, you're like my brother. So how do we do it?" So Ghanta Singh says, "Look, because you're my close friend and the only person I really care for in my life, I'm going to give you the first half of everything, each of these things." So Banta Singh is still very excited and he listens, Okay, how do we do this? So Ghanta Singh says, "Look, the cow, the front half of the cow will go to you. The rear half will come to me. Okay. Similarly, the blanket, you have it." He goes to the tree first. "The bay tree, you can have the roots and the stem. I'll take the branches and the leaves on the top." And then he comes down to the blanket. He says, "The blanket, well, you can keep it. You can keep it the whole day." So Banta Singh is offended, indignant. He says, No, how can you do that? You should share the blanket. I insist that we share the blanket." So Ghanta Singh says, "Okay, if you insist. You keep it during the day, the full day, but I'll take it at night." Okay. So Banta Singh was very happy. The arrangements were made and they started. Now 1 week went by and 2 weeks, and it took almost a month to go by for Banta Singh to figure out that something was not quite right with this arrangement, because every morning he had to get up early to feed the cow. The front half belonged to him. He had to fetch a pail of water, fresh water from the well, to give fresh water to the cow. And when all this was done, Ghanta Singh would get up after a nice restful sleep and come to milk the cow, because the the rear half belonged to him, right? And he milked the cow and had a large tumbler full of frothy cow's milk every morning. And poor Banta Singh had a little black tea in a cup that was not bigger than a thimble. So this was the scene as far as the milk was concerned. And then when it came to the blanket lay on his bed the whole day because he didn't need it. He was busy with his work. And at night, when it got chilly, Ghanta Singh would come and yank it away from his bed and curl under the warmth of the blanket and have a restful night's sleep, while poor Banta Singh would curl into a ball trying to keep his body warm. When the bay tree, that Banta Singh had very lovingly looked after, watered, used fertilizer, trimmed the leaves when required, when it started bearing fruit, Ghanta Singh came there, pulled up a chair and plucked the first one and popped it into his mouth. So when Bhanta Singh said, okay, what about me? Listen, friend, he says in a very weary tone, we decided that the roots and the stem belongs to you. Now, where does this bait grow? It grows on the branches. The branches and leaves belong to me, so it's mine. And he continued popping the fruit into his mouth without sharing a single one with poor Bhanta Singh, who just looked on. Now, one fine day, Bhanta Singh was furious. He didn't know how to deal with this, so he decided to take a long walk to calm himself. That's what he did. He kept walking and walking until he reached a forest that lay alongside the village. Now, when he reached there, he saw this sage sitting there with long, dreadlocks and with matted hair, and had a very kind face. And he looked at Bhanta Singh and asked him, "What's the matter, son? You look very sad. Why don't you tell me what your problem is?" Bhanta Singh just needed someone to pour his woes out to. His anger had given way to grief, and he told him the whole story, every bit of it. The sage listened patiently to him and then told him, "How could you do this, son? How could you let your friend cheat you like this?" He says, "I don't know what I did, father, but can you give me an idea of how to get out of this? Because I don't know what to do with myself. I'm very angry and I don't know what to do with my friend." So the sage says, "Come here, I'll give you an idea." And he called him close and whispered a few words in his ear. "Try this out and you should be fine," he said. Bhanta Singh cheered visibly. He cheered up and thanked him and went running home. So Ghanta Singh was surprised to find his friend, who had gone away in a very moody fashion, come back in a very, very chirpy fashion, and they had their meal together. They had supper together, after which Ghanta Singh demanded, "Where's my blanket? I need it for the night." So Bhanta Singh said, "Yes, of course, Ghanta Bhai, I'll get it for you." And he went and picked up his blanket and took a whole pail of water and poured it on the blanket. And he gave his friend the soaking blanket and said, here's a blanket. One look at the soggy mess and Ghanta Singh screamed at him, "What is wrong with you? Why did you pour water on the blanket? How can you use it now?" To which Bhanta looked very calmly at him and said, "Look, friend, the blanket is mine during the day to do as I wish, as I please, and I felt like pouring water on it, so I did. Now you can take it for the night." Ghanta Singh couldn't say a word. He just stared at his friend. What had happened to his simple, kind friend? But he took the soggy, wet blanket anyway and lay uncomfortably cold the whole night. Now the next morning, he rushed to milk his cow. Bhanta Singh had already woken up well in advance, had already fed the cow, but he was still hanging around over there. He hadn't really left the place. Ghanta Singh ignored him, kept a pail tightly, firmly between his thighs and started milking the cow. Bhanta Singh watched and waited for a little while, and when the pail was half full, he picked up a straw from the ground and tickled the cow's nose. The cow, of course, was startled. She reared and she kicked hard. And not only did she kick the pail of milk, which went all over the ground, yes, but also she managed to crack a nice resounding one on Ghanta Singh's face. They sprawled on the ground in milk, got up angry and shouted at his friend, "What did you do that for? You knew she would kick if you tickled her nose." To which Bhanta Singh again said very calmly, twirling the straw in his fingers, "Look, the front half of the cow belongs to me to do as I wish, to do as I please. I felt like tickling her nose and I'll do it again if I feel the need to." Ghanta Singh had nothing to say to that. So he just quietly left the scene. But that morning, like Bhanta Singh, he only had a small glass of black tea, which was not bigger than a thimble. After a while, he rushed to the bay tree and he started plucking the fruit one by one and popping them into his mouth, relishing the sweetness, not bothering to share as usual. When he saw Bhanta Singh strolling up with his enormous axe in his hands, and when he came up to the tree, Ghanta Singh caught up and said, please don't chop the tree down. If you do that, how will I get my fruit?" Even then it was, "How do I get my fruit?" To which Bhanta Singh said, "Look, my friend," very patiently explained it to him, "the roots and the stem belong to me, so I can do as I wish. I feel like chopping down the tree now. I don't want the stem anymore, so I'm going to chop it down." Kanta Singh realized that he'd actually been, lost the battle that he was trying to win here. And he told his friend, look, please don't cut the tree down. I'll agree with whatever you say. You tell me how you want to divide the prized possessions that we have. Okay, so I was wrong. I won't do it again. You can decide now. You decide. To which Banta Singh, in spite of everything that had happened before, said, okay, so we'll do it like this. We'll share the cow's milk, half and half, every day. The woolen blanket on alternate nights, one night for me, one night for you. And the other possession, which is what was the other possession? The tree. We will share the fruit. So that was what was decided. And he says, this is how we are going to go on ahead. Ghanta Singh hugged his friend. He felt a little ashamed because in spite of what he had done, his friend was still so much better and so much fairer, And they decided to share the possessions the way that Banta Singh had decided. They continued to remain friends. And just for the sake of the story, I would like to add, lived happily ever after. So that was the story of 50-50, a simple folk tale.
Indeed, a sweet revenge.
Yes,
because he showed his character. He showed how he was in spite of what he had done.
Exactly. And also, Deepti, you can't help thinking that there are so many people like Ghanta Singh who we do come across in life.
True,
yes,
so true.
And Banta Singh, of course.
I think right from college days, like sharing the canteen money.
Oh, canteen money. Yeah, you're telling
Yeah.
me. Friends who, would never have canteen money when it comes to buying food. And we are the ones paying. And when it comes to buying other goodies, especially books and, things that we all like, they would always find the money. So
True.
This is,
And they somehow magically feel that everyone else is dumb and they don't understand. And it's actually just a way of sympathizing that the others just give in, it's that they don't realize.
Yes.
And there has to be a sweet revenge like this, I feel, for all of them.
It's really, and very beautifully put. So, and also to point out that something is unfair, you have to make sure that people don't make fools of you, a fool of you,
True.
That's something.
It's nothing about being, innocent or being naive, but it's more about, it's not fair on anybody's part.
Exactly. Taking advantage, and if somebody does, then you should give it back to them in the right way, which Banta Singh did, thanks to the holy man.
So true. Such a cute story. Even kids will love it, I'm sure.
Oh yes, it's something which anyone can relate to. So that's it from Sugar and Spice to Indian Tales. Hope you enjoyed them.
Yes, we'll be back with more.
Yes, so meanwhile,
until next time.
Yeah, and do send in your feedback, your suggestions. We're waiting for them.
Yes.
So bye-bye.
From Sugar
and Spice. We
Bye-bye.
love you.
Love you all.